Pricing is simply a process, right? And it comes down to understanding the needs of the client and then coming up with three solutions for the client and then attaching a price and then presenting that solution and then closing the deal. So it's a process to come up with a price.
Welcome to Greater Than the Sum, the series where we demystify what it takes for small business owners in Canada and the accountants that support them to get control of their finances. I'm your host, Mark Cassini, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Plooto. Plooto is an all-in-one payment automation platform that automates your payable and receivable workflows. If you're a small business owner in Canada who's ready to take control of your finances, or an accountant looking to spend less time on manual tasks and more time as an advisor, then you're in the right place. Join me as we uncover the secret to making your business greater than the sum of its parts. Hey, Ryan, welcome to the show. Excited to have you here.
Hey, Mark, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. Let's get into it. So if you could just start with your name, your role, and where you work.
Sure. My name's Ryan Lazanis. I'm the CEO of Future Firm.
And what would you say is the mission of your business?
So Future Firm's mission is to help accounting firm owners systematize, scale their firms, and live a life of freedom.
Love that. I think we could all probably do with a bit more freedom these days. What would you say is the why behind what you do? What motivates you?
What motivates me is helping the accounting profession. I feel that we've lacked support in the industry. I'm sure we'll get into this, but I was a former accounting firm owner who made a ton of mistakes trying to scale a modern accounting firm. And I created Future Firm to be the resource I wish I always had when I was running my firm.
And speaking of resources you wish you always had, what advice would you give your past self before opening your own business?
Right. So this is my second business. So I've gone through the whole cycle. I've taken my firm from scratch all the way to acquisition in just 5 years. And I was able to kind of zoom out and take a look at what I did well and what went pretty wrong. And I think one of the things that I did differently when I started Future Firm is I started with the end in mind. And I didn't do that when I jumped into my first business. I knew I wanted some freedom and some flexibility and a better lifestyle, but I didn't really adequately define what that meant. And with Future Firm, I concretely defined what I wanted the end to look like and then reverse engineered the plan to get there. So that's what I typically recommend to anyone jumping into business is clarify what you really want out of life and use your business as a vehicle to help you get there.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. And obviously you've spent the bulk of your career in the accounting space. So what would you say people misunderstand the most about it?
That there's many different paths. I think those that go into accounting follow a very typical path. They start in a firm and then maybe they move to industry, but there's many different avenues. And I think I'm proof of that. You know, I started in a firm, I went into industry, and then I started a business non-related to actually doing any of the accounting work. So there's many different paths and avenues that you can take.
Thanks for giving us the overview of the background and the experiences thus far. We'll dig deeper in a moment here. As part of the next portion of our conversation, I want to just kind of take a look at the bigger picture of your career and a lot of the learnings and lessons that you've uncovered in your experience thus far. So prior to starting Future Firm, you launched your own cloud accounting firm in 2013 called Zen Accounting. Cloud accounting was still relatively new at the time, so this could be considered a pretty bold move. What motivated you to take the leap?
I mean, that's a good question. There was no other accounting firms like the one I was creating when I started it. So people weren't interacting like this online in 2013, or not as much as we are now. They weren't used to interacting with an accountant virtually or using all these different types of cloud tools like Plooto or any of the cloud accounting apps out there. A lot of them didn't even exist at the time. I think, again, I've always had a sense of frustration with the accounting profession that we haven't moved forward quickly enough, that the accounting firm business model is still today a pretty archaic way of doing business. And I just identified more with the entrepreneur and saw the amount of pain that they had to go through when dealing with their firm or trying to get their accounting done. And I wanted to reverse all those pain points. So I just really wanted to make it a more pleasant, pain-free accounting experience. And that's really what drove me to start the firm in the way that I did.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I'm curious, what do you think are some of the things in your mind that is holding the accounting profession back, as you stated?
Well, I mean, we're a very conservative profession. We've been taught to be conservative. We've been trained that way. We've been taught to be skeptical. There's a concept called professional skepticism that we always need to exercise. So we've been trained in that fashion. So it's ingrained in us. So I think that's really why we've lagged many other industries. It's just the mindset that many have.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of beat that out of yourself in a way when you've probably heard that repeated throughout your career and your education. But I do like that term of professional skepticism. It's the first I've heard of it, but I'm sure as you say, as for most accountants, it's kind of second nature at this point.
Exactly. You have to be skeptical of everything. And we also are, we overcalculate, which goes in the face of innovation.
Yeah, of course. So from what I understand, it was those early experiences growing and scaling the company that later inspired your work at Future Firm. I think it'd be great if you could talk to us about those early days and some of the challenges you came across that you now seek to mitigate for other accountants.
Most people that start an accounting firm, they're just like myself. They've worked in a firm for many years. They've maybe worked in industry for some time, and then they get sick and tired of some of the stuff where they might be employed, and they want more control and try to give themselves a life of more freedom and flexibility. And they just start a firm and they just get very quickly into client acquisition mode and a service delivery mode. And I think we're good at that, but we don't know anything about running a business. We've never been taught how to run a business. We don't know how to price services or how to sell services. We don't really know how to market the services. We might not have had any experience managing a team or hiring a team. So this was everything that I had to go through. And this is what I see firsthand with Future Firm, where we're coaching hundreds of firms across the globe. We just don't know anything when it comes to running a business. And, I made all the mistakes possible. The earliest mistake I made was around pricing. I got our pricing totally wrong. And, it was years of trial and error before I actually figured a lot of these things out. So I think, those are the big challenges that I typically see, and that inspired me to start Future Firm, was to help others avoid the common pitfalls and traps that most firm owners run into.
I find it kind of ironic, and I'm sure some of the listeners will as well, to hear, a former accountant speak to some of the things that I think most people would just assume accountant knows, right? Running a business, obviously very good with the numbers, but something that stood out to me, you mentioned pricing. So it's kind of refreshing to hear someone with your experience in your role be quite honest to say, like, hey, it might look like from the outside that an accountant knows all there is to know about running a business, but that's not always the case. And there are opportunities for accountants to learn and to be coached. And of course, that's where Future Firm comes in. I think trying just to dispel this myth, or maybe this perception that, well, if you come from any kind of business background, whether it be accounting or marketing or sales, the running the business side of things is easy. And clearly, based on what you said, that's not always the case.
Not at all. And, we're taught to understand the numbers, and we've seen hundreds of different businesses and their financial statements and the numbers behind it. We can understand, like, if a business is going well, if it's not going well, what they might need to do differently to improve the financial situation. But all the things that go into actually running a business, that's not something that we generally have experience with. And that's where we need help.
Makes a lot of sense. And, leaning a little bit more into those challenges, from what I've read, it was not always easy to convince clients to trust and adopt cloud accounting in the early days. So much so that you ended up focusing on tech-savvy clients, and in particular, startups. How has business acceptance of cloud accounting evolved since then?
Well, obviously, it's night and day. I mean, now people are actively seeking for an easy, seamless, frictionless experience in all aspects of their life, facilitated by the internet. In 2013, people were nervous. It's like, I'm going to have my financial information online, and what happens if someone takes it, and how secure is all this? And it was a barrier just to overcome that. There was a level of uncomfort when it came to saying, we're going to interact like this, and we're going to use these tools that are going to automatically, sync with your bank and pull in the financial information. It was a challenge in some instances. And that's why, where we landed very early on was the tech startups that really enjoyed that way of working. And we built a bit of a niche across tech startups.
It's amazing how much can change in a short period of time. Obviously, the experiences of the early 2020s have kind of changed things a lot faster than I think anybody has expected. But even to your point of just being comfortable having a conversation online with someone whom, sure, you visited their website, perhaps you've had a phone call, but you've never actually met in person. I'm sure, a decade ago would just seem so, not necessarily unnatural, but scary, especially to your point when it comes to sharing financial information. When you made the transition from focusing more so on tech startups to non-startups, how did you coach people through that discomfort, as you called it?
I think we were trying to appeal to a certain type of client. We would naturally attract those that wanted to operate and collaborate in that manner. Just the way we laid out the website and the steps that someone had to follow, fill out this form and then schedule, an online meeting link. I don't even know if Zoom was a thing 10 years ago. I think we were using Skype. So it's like add Zen accounting on Skype, and this is how we're gonna chat. So, we developed a sales process and our marketing around targeting those that wanted that kind of service. And the ones that weren't comfortable, like one of our first tests was if they would fill out the form and then not schedule a meeting and email us and say, well, can you just come to the office? Like we would not meet. One of our best clients was 2 blocks away and we had to do things virtually. So that was just the way we operated. And we had a couple tests to make sure that we'd be a good fit with the client.
But obviously that, consistency and, willingness to stick to your kind of fundamentals as a business has served you well. So again, speaking about Future Firm, more specifically now, it focuses on helping firms save time, increase their earnings, and ultimately have better balance in their life. So what are some of the common mistakes you see firms making that hold them back from achieving those things?
So all the things that, I just mentioned, pricing. So underpricing is a big problem. If we look at why a lot of firms are so busy, it's because they're spreading themselves too thin, doing too much for too little. So underpricing, undercutting themselves is a very big problem. Just the way they structure their teams, generally speaking, they're structuring the team in a way where the firm owner is always going to be the bottleneck. So there's ways to improve the team structure, generally with bringing on more senior level resources earlier on, so that they can be the buffer between, the firm owner or partner and the clients. I think pulling yourself out of a lot of the day-to-day client work is one of the keys to a more scalable firm, and a lot of firm owners have a lot of trouble there. Marketing is a huge issue, a huge pain point. A lot of firms don't know how to market, especially in the digital age, and it's getting harder and harder as time progresses. And finding talent. There's a shortage of accountants out there, but even given that, they have very bad strategies for attracting talent. So these are some of the main issues that I see across the board.
Yeah, and there's one I want to dig a little bit deeper into if I can, and that's pricing. Obviously, as a marketer, it's something very near and dear to my heart myself. In working with SMBs throughout my own career as well in various capacities, I too have kind of observed this hesitancy to raise prices because of the fear that it could obviously negatively impact relationships, but also turn away potential business. So how do you have that conversation with a client when, it comes time to raise those prices? How do you get them over that hump of, hey, you might be on paper charging a bit more and turning people away, but that's how it, in actuality will be a good thing in the long run?
So I think there's a couple of tactics you could utilize that work well for a more introverted type of person. And if we look at accountants, and I'd include myself in that mix, highly introverted and don't want to maybe be confrontational. And I don't think there's anyone that enjoys confrontation. But when we're trying to fetch a higher price from an existing client, it could be very uncomfortable. And when we're trying to fetch a higher price from a prospective client, well, we might get a little uncomfortable because if we go too high, we're going to lose that prospective client that we might want. So there's a lot of undercutting that happens. I like to devise a process that works well for more introverted people. And the tactic I like is the 3-tiered pricing methodology, which is you have a gold, silver, and bronze package. So you can aim very high on the gold and silver packages, and you can be a little bit more conservative on the bronze, but you're not giving it all the way on the bronze, and you let the client self-select. Obviously, there's some guidance that you can provide, and we're just not pushing out 3 random solutions or 3 random packages. It has to make sense. But that's one tactic that I really enjoy that works really, really well across our member base.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I would imagine that it was probably learning that came through working with tech startups, because that is something, that most B2B software solutions employ, your good, better, best, or your gold, silver, bronze, as you stated it, to not necessarily make yourself available to everybody, but to provide prospective customers with options to find the solutions and price point that best works with their needs and their budget. So I think that's a fantastic recommendation. And I'm sure probably takes some explaining at first, but I think once that conversation takes place, I would imagine it's pretty easy for a lot of your clients to wrap their head around.
Yeah, it's just coming up with the packages and then coming up with pricing is simply a process, right? And it comes down to understanding the needs of the client and then coming up with 3 solutions for the client and then attaching a price and then presenting that solution and then closing the deal. So it's a process to come up with a price. But the other thing I like about the 3-tiered methodology is we could also guard your time better because, for instance, let's say, we're a big fan of the 3-tiered pricing where it's a fixed monthly price for a defined level of service and support. Most firms are giving away unlimited support when they're charging a monthly price. So it's not a free-for-all. A client shouldn't be able to call you 20 times a day on your base package. So there's a way to guard your time on some of the lower price packages as well.
Especially if you're working as a team of one or maybe a small team, there's only so much time in a day. And as you scale and take on more clients, those clients are going to demand more from you. And I think it's smart to set those expectations from the outset to say, hey, this is the package that we've agreed to. These are the hours that we're able to allocate based on your budget. And if you feel like you need more, well, then let's go look at the 3 tiers again. Maybe we need to move you into the next highest tier. Or maybe we need to reevaluate how we're supporting you. And if there's any other underlying issues we can resolve so that there isn't so much of a demand for our time all of the time. So I think it's really smart and it opens up that conversation so that your clients know where they stand and kind of what the conversation would look like should they start to move outside the bounds of their agreed upon a package.
Correct. Except the one thing I'd say is I always advise a firm to never justify the price based on time spent or hours included. So I want to make a complete separation from this is the time we're spending on you and instead frame the price in terms of here's the deliverables or the value that's being provided.
You've spoken in the past about how accountants are only trained in accounting and neglect to pick up other skills that are fundamental to actually running an accounting firm, such as sales and marketing. How can business owners bridge that knowledge and skills gap? So
my answer is extremely biased. So anyone listening has to take that with a grain of salt, but there's resources out there to help you skip through the trial and error. Like when I ran my firm, I had to go through the trial and error. I had to go through, here's how I did the 3-tier pricing. And, my typical package was $150 a month and you get everything included. And I had to learn the hard way that that's not sustainable. I had to learn the hard way about making the wrong hires and them turning over very, very quickly. That was one of the biggest pain points I had in my business in the first couple of years is learning how to recruit and how to retain because everybody was turning over and that caused a lot of stress and anxiety. So you could do it yourself, but there are resources out there. There's online community. There's free communities, free resources. Obviously, there's paid resources like our Future Firm Accelerate program. But I feel like there's so much collective experience out there and people have been there, done that why not tap into that and just shortcut the results? So again, you could read up on it. I have a whole bunch of books on how price theory and all this kind of stuff, and you could figure it out yourself. But to shorten that time frame, just tap into the existing resources that exist out there.
Well, Ryan, thanks for sharing your experiences in running, Zen Accounting and now Future Firm and sharing, some of the lessons that you've shared with your own clients. I'm sure the listeners are going to glean a ton from that. So I want to transition and kind of highlight how you learned the hard way and maybe some through the failures and kind of successes, in running your businesses, but more so from a financial perspective. So with that in mind, I want to ask, as you reflect on your journey in building the financial operations of your business, how has your pricing strategy played a role in shaping the overall financial health and sustainability of the company? What key lessons have you learned about pricing along the way? Obviously, you've mentioned quite a few already, but if there's any other you want to share, I think now would be a great time.
Yeah, for me, this is the starting point. Whenever a firm comes to us for help and they're talking about, I need help with automation or processes or anything or marketing, the first thing we say is, let's take a look at your pricing strategy, because if you have a bad packaging and pricing strategy, your marketing is going to suffer because you're going to bring in more of the wrong clients at the wrong price. You're going to have cash flow or profitability issues. It's amazing how many accounting firms I see with cash flow or profit. issues when we specialize in this, right? And it all starts with the pricing. Get the pricing wrong and you're going to see all those other things cascade. So yeah, I mean, like I said, I started my pricing at $125 a month, $150 a month. It was not sustainable. I had to educate myself on price theory. I had to educate myself on the sales process to land better clients at better prices. And ultimately, it just comes down to understanding the people side of things. Like if I'm speaking to an accounting firm, we're having these one-to-one conversations with a prospective client. We have to understand the people side of things. We have to get into their head, understand what makes them tick, understand, where we're going to drive value and how much that matters for them. And then that's how we're going to arrive at a better price. There's no formula. Accountants are always trying to calculate and reconcile every single number, but there's no formula for a very good price. It's just about understanding the person.
No, and that's all very helpful. And I think you've highlighted something that I think a lot of, business owners, accountants, clients kind of learn maybe over time to try and error much as you did, is that pricing is a bit of an art and a science, right? I think everybody just assumes because it's numbers first that, well, we can just math this to the perfect price. And that's not always the case. There is an element of understanding, to your point, the customer's or client's willingness to pay relative to the value that you want to offer. And it's not always going to be perfect, right? There's always going to be opportunities to iterate, either with the same client or with future clients. Try different things, make tweaks, see where things are working, and that's where kind of the art I feel like comes into play. And as you said, like that's a lesson that I think you either learn through trial and failure, or you partner with someone like yourself at Future Firm who can kind of help you fast track through some of those misses and those learnings.
Absolutely.
Can you share an example of a financial win? Maybe it was streamlining a process, implementing a new piece of technology that you feel had a transformative impact on your business. What decisions led to this success, and what advice would you give to others looking to replicate that same success?
So transformative is maybe a strong word, but one thing that, like if we're talking about a new piece of technology that I really enjoy, that I implemented in my Zen accounting days, that I've been using for probably 7 years now, 8 years, is software that helps enable one-way interviews with potential candidates. So I really don't like being involved whatsoever in recruitment, interviewing, any of that stuff. I did it. I never want to do it again. I have a team that handles that at the moment. I'm very happy about it. But I just found it so painful, and reviewing resumes and then getting into interviews with candidates. And I knew within like the first 3 minutes, I was like, oh boy, this is not a fit at all. And how do you not be rude ending those kind of conversations, right? So I implemented an app that actually automates some of the screening process. At the time, there was an app called Spark Hire. I believe it still exists. Now we use an app called Vervo. But basically what it does is it's a tool that you see a resume you like, you don't want to jump to an interview yet. You have a couple preloaded questions that candidates would answer on their own time. And you'd have a pretty good idea if you ask the right questions, you'd have a pretty good idea if like this is something that you think would be a good fit. And then you would move to the interview. So that screening process saves so much time and so much pain that it's been a staple in our recruitment process for the last 7, 8 years now. So not transformative perhaps, but a very important part of our company, I'd say.
And I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. When it comes to looking at any kind of potential tool, software or otherwise, what are some of the things that you look for when evaluating? What advice have you given maybe some of your clients when they're evaluating tools or solutions that could help them run their business more efficiently?
The one thing that I always try to bring to the forefront when dealing with accountants is accountants are quite cost conscious and sometimes have a hard time looking at the return on investment, right? So like that app that I just mentioned to you. I mean, I was not a huge company. We weren't hiring, dozens of people every single month. And sometimes we wouldn't even use that app every single month, but it was a couple $100 a month, and people would be like, wow, $300 a month. Like forget that. I'll just go through the manual process. But if it saves me an hour, my time is worth more than that. People are undervaluing their time. So I like to just say, how much time is this going to save you? And if it's saving you like an hour or two a month, it's probably worth it. I like to take cost almost completely out of the equation when I'm looking at these tools.
Yeah, I think that's smart. And you're right. Obviously being an accountant or a bookkeeper, you're going to, look at the number first, and sometimes bigger numbers can seem more scary. But, I once heard, and I regretfully can't recall the individual's name, but I think they said something akin to, tripping over dollars to make sense. Right. So you're letting yourself focus on the cost and trying to avoid it when really, if you just, realize the time savings, as you said, and the value of that time relative to the cost, if you decide not to move forward with the solution, you save some pennies. But what about all the dollars you're giving up by not implementing the tool and maybe paying a bit up front? Thanks so much for sharing kind of, some insight into some of the financial, wins and lessons you've learned along the way. Well, Ryan, like I said, this has been a great conversation thus far. I know I've learned a lot. I'm sure the listeners have as well. Before I let you go, I do have a couple closing questions. My first one being, you've spoken in the past about the dangers of letting yourself become overawed by the amount of options when it comes to automation. Is there any advice you can share with the audience on how to avoid getting overwhelmed by the level of choice on offer?
I think it first comes down to understanding the problem that we want to solve. Because there's a lot of great marketing out there, and there's a lot of distractions and shiny objects. And I see this all the time with like people I've coached in the past. It's like, oh, I got this in my inbox, and like, this looks amazing. It has this feature. I need this. But that's just good marketing. You probably don't need it. So it comes down to understanding where your real priorities are, what the big challenges are that you need to solve, and whether this tool is going to get you that much further down the road. So trying to block out those shiny objects, I think, takes some discipline and understanding what your priorities are.
Where can people learn more about you and Future Firm?
Future Firm, we have a lot of free content that's actionable, practical on our website, futurefirm.co. Our most popular piece of content is a newsletter that I've been sending every single Tuesday morning since I started Future Firm for 5 years. And it just contains helpful information to help firms systematize, scale, but more than anything, reduce workload. So they can go to futurefirm.co/newsletter. We have about 10,000 readers on that newsletter at the moment. So that's the best place if people want to get help when it comes to running their firm.
That's amazing. And I'm sure you'll have some new eager subscribers after our conversation today, because like I said earlier, I know I've learned a lot. I'm sure the listeners have as well. And if they're able to continue that learning by subscribing to the newsletter, it seems like a no-brainer. So I'm sure you'll see an uptick there. Well, awesome. Ryan, like I said, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through kind of your own experiences in running two businesses, the learnings that you've unlocked, and how you've been able to effectively share and help your clients with those same learnings. So thank you again. And we wish you and the team and the work that you're doing at Future Firm nothing but the best.
Thank you very much, Mark. Really appreciate it. It was great chatting with you.
Likewise. Take care. That's all for today's episode of Greater Than the Sum. I hope you all got some great takeaways from our guest. Remember, taking control of your finances is within reach, and it's not as complicated as it seems. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. You can check out more about Plooto on Plooto.com for resources, tips, and advice on how to get control over your cash flow. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like to discuss, let us know on LinkedIn, Instagram, or X. See you next time.